Hello everybody, my name is Steven and welcome back to Storytime. Without wasting any further time, let's get into our stories of the day. No running for me. This happened mostly in the same unit but does involve other people. The malicious compliance was not mine this time though. That honor goes to my buddy, Pig. This was towards the end of my time in the unit, and Pig's time in the army. I was changing duty stations, PCS, and Pig was getting out of the military, ETS. We had one buck sergeant who wasn't a great leader. He was promoted because he could kiss some butt like it was an Olympic event, and he was going for the gold. Also, this one, Sergeant P we'll call him, was promoted in the unit after everyone knew him. It creates an interesting dynamic when you're promoted and placed back in your unit. While everyone must follow your orders, everyone knows the things you did when you were a specialist. It just makes it difficult to earn the respect of your once peers and be an effective leader. And let's be honest, most people are not natural leaders and it takes time to develop those skills. Many of the newly promoted sergeants had a difficult time adjusting. Rather than leading, they tended to throw their stripes around. And to top it off, Sergeant P wasn't even great at his job. I mean, I was one of the weakest mechanics in my unit and he was worse than I was. With a few weeks left in service, Pig started out processing. There was a bunch of stuff to do for this, one of which was the out process physical. Pig did this as early as he possibly could. Any disability claims are based off that physical, so if you were to injure yourself during physical training, this would not be in the report. So, no physical training after the physical. Now, Pig was not an immaculate soldier. Like me, he threw the uniform in the dryer and brush shined his boots. Pig was a fantastic mechanic though. He was one of the strongest mechs in our unit. He could also drive anything with wheels and was assigned to the wrecker. He was the guy everyone went to when they had an issue that they couldn't figure out. So Pig did his physical and was sitting out physical training. A few days after the physical, Sergeant P comes to Pig and tells him that we have a battalion run and that everyone is required to participate. Pig informs him of the situation and politely tells him that running ain't in the cards. Sergeant P gets belligerent and begins yelling and cussing and, just in general, letting Pig know where he stands rank-wise. Pig at first just calmly repeats himself until he gets angry. Sergeant P was off the handle at this point. Pig finally has enough and yells, "F you, I ain't running." A couple days later, Pig is a private E3, disrespecting an NCO. From what we heard, some of the senior NCOs in the platoon were pushing P to just drop the issue, and they would speak to Pig to ensure it wouldn't happen again. After all, Pig had been invaluable to our unit during deployment and he would be leaving the military shortly. And they all thought that P was kinda in the wrong. I mean, Pig did get out of hand, but he wasn't wrong about the run. But P was having none of it. He wanted to make sure that all of the other lower enlisted would know not to speak to him in that manner. I'm not sure you can call this maliciously complying with a demotion. I do, but Pig sure had some fun being a private again. Whenever Pig was asked to perform one of the more complicated tasks, his response was, "I'm just a private, I have no idea how to do that." The motor sergeant asked him to do something one day. Pig gave his response in the most private-like voice you could conjure and just stared at the motor sergeant. The motor sergeant was staring daggers at Sergeant P, who suddenly had some official sergeant duties to attend in his office and scurried off like a little rat. Pig did continue running the wrecker, and he spent most of his days either sitting there waiting for a call or performing routine maintenance on his truck. Nobody really bothered him much. Aftermath. This is the funniest bit. I changed duty stations shortly after this. My new motor sergeant was a good guy and a fantastic leader. He was one of those guys that could give you the crappiest task and make you feel good about doing it. I also found out later that he was an uncle that I never knew I had. But that's another story. So, about 2 months there, the motor sergeant hollers from his office. Apparently, I have a phone call from someone in my previous unit. What fresh heck is this? Is douche now trying to get me from afar? No, it was Sergeant P. He was calling to let me know that he was changing duty stations and had been assigned to this unit. Fantastic. The unit put you into a platoon based on your military occupational specialty, MOS. Because P was the same specialty, he would be assigned to this platoon. He had called the motor sergeant's phone number, so I had taken the call in his office. The motor sergeant asked me about it, so I told him. Then he asked more questions, and I told him all about the story with Pig. I was dropping dimes like a cheap slot machine. After spilling all the beans, the motor sergeant sat back and thought for a minute, then asked a single question. "Can he fix a truck though?" My response, "About as good as I can." He told me that was enough and dismissed me. A few months later, P walked into the motor pool and came over to chat with me. Apparently, the sergeant had him assigned to the QC department. He didn't know why. He did like the job. You can either be a poor leader or poor at your job, but you cannot be both at the same time. Man, if I was Pig in that situation, I would have been pretty frustrated, knowing that you're not supposed to do anything after the physical and being demanded that you do. If you were in Pig's shoes here, what would you do? Would you swallow your pride or would you fight it? Let me know what you would do in the comments below. Let you use the can? Yes, sir. Obligated to inform all concerned that this is not my story. It's secondhand from my dad, 20-year retiree of the US Navy. Important characters. My dad, new officer. For those who aren't aware, when you flush the toilet in submarines, it's flushed into waste storage tanks. When the tanks get full enough, standard procedure when he was an active submariner was to pressurize the tanks and open them to the ocean, shooting the tank contents out into the ocean. During this process, you could use the toilets, but it was discouraged and you were definitely not supposed to flush them, as submarine toilets are flushed via rotation of an oversized ball valve that opens into the waste storage tank system. When the tanks were pressurized, it was like firing a potato cannon at whatever or whomever was standing in front of it, according to my dad. During one of his last tours aboard sub, they got a new officer, both to the boat and relatively new to the service, who was in his first post aboard any ship or boat prior to this. My dad said new guy was decent most of the time but had his moments. The first time they had to pressurize and vent the waste tanks, Dad was one of the engineering crew aboard ship, making sure all the toilet and other related valves were in the correct position, putting up chains across the toilet doorways, generally prepping for cleaning. He's put up the toilet chains and they're just about to up the pressure on the tanks and will then start to vent. And up comes new guy to use the toilet. Dad says he started to warn new guy about the waste tank cleaning, but new guy was having none of it. He told Dad to shut his mouth and clear out of the way. Emergency, apparently? In true malicious compliance style, my dad stepped aside, said nothing, and allowed new guy to use the toilet. My dad says that a couple minutes later, he and other nearby crew hear the thumping loud discharge of what sounds like a cannon. Everyone charged into the toilet and finds new guy, mud mask style, plastered with his own poop. It's all over his face, visible up in his nostrils, unconscious on the floor. The corpsman on board later reported at the bar after they got back that he had to clean up pretty intensely. Under the guy's eyelids, in his mouth and up into his gum lines a little bit, etc. New guy earned a nickname, Behind His Back, and paid a bit more attention to what people had to say to him after that. Edit. Several requests later, if I remember correctly, guy's last name was something along the lines of Schlitzberger. Crew just dropped the L and the Z in his last name. Upon review, I do believe that that is a very accurate nickname. My parents took the door off my bedroom to punish me. Alright. When I was a teenager, I would argue a lot with my parents. Out of all the kids in the family, I was the biggest arguer. This was worse when we had international students living with us, part of my mom's job, because they just had to stand there awkwardly listening to the teenager v-parent shouting match. Then, at one point when I was in middle school, the peak of my arguing, my mom decided that if I can't respect people, I need to earn others' respect, or something like that. So she and my dad unhinged the door from my bedroom. At first, this was mildly irritating since I always had to wait to use the bathroom to change, and if I was trying to sleep while others were being loud, I couldn't just shut my door. It also affected me being able to get ready for school since I always had to wait to use the bathroom to change, and me changing in the bathroom would hold up the rest of the family. After about 3 days, I had had enough. I decided I would change in my bedroom without the door, my fat, acne-ridden naked body on display for all to see. The exchange student we had at the time caught on immediately and brought it up to my mom. Exchange student thought it was funny, albeit embarrassing. Mom was embarrassed that exchange student's American experience had to involve her pudgy naked teenager acting like an exhibitionist. I got my door back. Note, my parents aren't cruel. I am the oldest and thus their punishments were more of a knee-jerk reaction since everything I did was a first for them. I do believe this classifies as a flat-out power move. You leave too early. Like a lot of stories here, my malicious compliance was due to scheduling. I was a system administrator for a big 3-letter telecom company in the one small department. There were 2 admins, me and Jay. Jay was awesome. Super intelligent, very friendly, and was great at his job. He and I decided that I would come in early and he would stay late, so there was more coverage during the day. It worked great for both of us for a few years. I would get to work around 6:30 a.m. I would review all the system-generated reports overnight, check the health of the servers and database, and then generate the daily reports for various managers throughout the company, including my own manager and his boss. After 9 hours, plus 1 for lunch, I would go home around 4:30 every day. Jay would show up around 10:30 and would usually be the last person to leave around 7. My old boss left and my new boss, T, was a major idiot and a huge jerk. He knew nothing about IT and should have never been put in charge of people. He was a nepotism hire. After about 6 months of T working there, he brought me into his office. He said that he was very concerned about how I would just up and leave each day at 4:30. So consistent that you could set your watch by it. I tried to explain that I'm there at 6:30, 3 hours before he showed up, and 4 hours before Jay showed up. But T was having none of that. I was leaving way too early. I asked him what my hours should be. He said I should be more like Jay. He said Jay is usually here long after everyone else leaves. Once again, I tried to point out that Jay gets here at 10:30, 4 hours after me, and leaves by 7. An 8.5 hour day with an hour lunch, where I get there at 6:30 and leave by 4:30. A 10-hour day with an hour lunch. T just couldn't comprehend that. So I complied. I told him that I would be the last one to leave from now on. T was happy. So I came to work about 10:15 the next morning, which was a Friday. I started my normal routine and about 10 minutes later, Jay came in. We worked the day and the last person, with the exception of Jay and me, left around 6:30. We both left at 6:45 and I made sure that Jay left the building before me. The following Monday, I once again showed up at 10:15. This time, there was about a dozen emails and a few voicemails from managers and executives all over the company wanting to know why they haven't received their daily reports. These reports were used in various Monday morning meetings all over the globe. I explained to them that my hours have changed and they would be getting their daily reports by 1 p.m. One of those executives was my boss's boss's boss. Before the end of the day, I was in her office with T and T's boss. I explained to her the same situation that I had explained to T before this all started. She immediately told T that the work I did between 6:30 and 10:30 was mission critical to the entire company, and I was to immediately go back to my old schedule. I then sheepishly pointed out that 6:30 to 4:30 was 9-hour workdays, and Jay's 10:30 to 7 was 7.5-hour workdays. I said I would be happy to go back to a 6:30 start time, but was going to limit my hours to 8-hour days since I didn't get overtime. So, starting the next day, Tuesday, and every day after, I showed up at 6:30, did my work, and smiled and waved at T when I went home at 3:30 later that afternoon. So consistent, you could set your watch by it. Just another classic case of terrible management. But with that being said, that's all the stories we have for today. So which of these stories that I read today were your personal favorite and why? Let me know which one piqued your interest the most in the comments below. And thank you all so much for watching and listening to the Storytime channel. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing and don't forget to turn the notification bell on so you'll never miss an upcoming video. Thank you all again for watching and listening to the Storytime channel.